Ezekiel 33:3.
Hello, everyone, and happy Sabbath. I always say this, but I have a pretty interesting study for today. It's called The Worship of the Serpent. We're going to look at a lot of different places in the world, and we're going to take it back to the Bible and then figure out where did this come from in the first place. And there will be no guessing. We will prove conclusively where the serpent worship came from, because it's actually across every single continent in the world. The only one I haven't explored is Antarctica, and the reason why is because, well, there's really nothing there for me to explore. So we'll take a look at ancient serpent worship across the world. We'll look at the connection between the serpents and the pyramids, and we'll also take a look at the serpent and the scriptures, and we'll connect all these pieces together. So starting first with the ancient the ancient world worship of the serpent.
Dragons have appeared in virtually every major culture across the world, and are so old that scholars genuinely have no idea when or where the dragon first originated. Perhaps most relevantly, dragons have a tendency to be worshipped as gods. Archaeological evidence strongly suggests that the ancient Chinese worshipped dragons, known as Long, as far back as 5,000 years BC. In Mesoamerica, carvings of Quetzalcoatl, the Aztec god of wind, air, and learning, actually predated the Aztecs by over 2,000 years. And for the Australian Aboriginals, one of the most isolated and ancient people on Earth, their creator god is known as the rainbow serpent, yet another variation of the dragon. In the pyramid texts, which are the oldest known corpus of ancient Egyptian religious writings, lies one of the first literary descriptions of this incredible creature. They describe a giant serpent deity known as Denwen, whose body was made of fire and whose flames were so powerful they ignited a massive blaze that nearly obliterated all the other gods of the Egyptian pantheon. Well, it is an interesting revelation that for many of the cultures that worshipped dragons in the past, the preferred sacrificial offerings were indeed virgin girls. The Aztecs sacrificed a virgin girl to the feathered serpent god Quetzalcoatl twice a year in their 18-month calendar. In Japanese Shinto tradition, the 8-headed dragon Orochi demanded the sacrifice of the virgin daughters of 2 minor deities every 7 years. And perhaps you've heard of George and the Dragon. This classical folktale, which is confirmed to predate Christianity, tells of a dragon that demanded a sheep and a maiden, aka a female virgin, sacrifice every day. Why this idea is so prevalent and consistent across cultures and time remains unknown. However, in European folklore, the pure, untainted blood of virgins is sometimes implied to be equal in value to gold, and is often used in a manner of currency, for example, as a means of exchange with the dragon, or appeasement.
So we're going to start taking a look at some of these places in the world, and we're going to start connecting some dots here. What do they have in common? Starting off with Mexico, we've got Quetzalcoatl. If you ever went on a Mexican vacation, you might be quite familiar with the idea that there is this serpent that's worshipped, or at least at one time was worshipped in Mexico. You'll probably see it all over the place, especially in tourist destinations, because they like to kind of decorate the hotels with it. Our next example, also in Mexico, but we're looking much, much lower. So around the Mayan Riviera, we can see here the Mayans. You can see that on the map there. Mayans, we had Kukulkan. So we can see a temple here, and actually at the bottom of the temple, you can see the mouth of the serpent that's open. So we're talking southern Mexico. If we take a look at India, I've got tons of examples. I mean, it could go on for days. So I can't go through all the examples in India. I'll just show you a couple ideas. So India, all these serpents represented something called the Kundalini serpent. And for those of you familiar with the New Age, you should probably know it has to do with yoga. And the Kundalini serpent was something that the yogi was trying to rise up their spinal column. If you take a look, you can see that there's this god and a goddess. One is blue, one is red, one is Vishnu, one is Parvati. If you take a look behind them, though, you can see the serpent, and there are 7. I will also point out that there are 7 chakras. I'll also point out in Kundalini Yoga, it's a type of meditation, and the meditation is trying to awaken a serpent at the base of the spine and raise it up to the top of the brain. And that's when enlightenment happens. That's when the third eye opens, like that all-seeing eye that you see on the American money. If we take a look at Japan, I could go on for days. There's countless temples with dragons, the dragon temples of Japan, and the Shinto religion is full of them as well. If I take a look in Cambodia, I've got Queen, I think it's pronounced Khmer. So here we can see again something very similar to Hinduism, where we see this array of different serpents and they're behind the head of the deity. Here we have in Japan an earth goddess. I believe the pronunciation is Nugua, but you can see here this earth goddess, she has the head of a human, but the body of a snake. Notice she's female. So you're noticing here between these serpents, sometimes you're seeing male, sometimes you're seeing female. If we take a look in Greece, now we're moving over to Europe. Just in case you thought this was isolated to Asia, we already saw that it was in South America, or at least in Mexico. Now we're moving over to Europe, and we can see the Oracle of Delphi. So the Oracle of Delphi, we can see on the left-hand side, here's a coin, and you can clearly see that they had this serpent, and then there was a priestess. The priestess was someone who was an oracle. They would inquire her with questions. What they did in Delphi, which was kind of interesting, was the mythology was that Apollo had slayed the serpent, and then the decaying body of the serpent was causing the priestess to have hallucinations, and then she would give a vision or she would give some kind of a prophecy. So the woman that you're looking at here would be the priestess that would provide the man or whoever came with the oracle, right? The prophecy, the divination, but she would get high from something. They found out later, or at least they speculate, that what happened at Delphi was quite likely there was some kind of a natural gas leak. So the mythology based around the serpent, maybe, but it's more likely the idea that there was gas leaking from a rock. These women were actually sniffing gas and they were hallucinating, and then they would give their visions. If you take a look beside this, you can actually see that there's a column, like a wooden column, where the tree's cut down. And you'll notice that on the tree stump, you have this coiled serpent wrapped around it. If you do your investigation, you'll find the Christmas tree is strongly connected to this symbol right here. The tinsel going around the Christmas tree is exactly what you see at the Oracle of Delphi. If we go to Italy, we can see the snake temple of Isis. At the snake temple of Isis, this was in Italy, you can see two serpents, and then you can see this is in Pompeii, Italy. If we go to Turkey, we can see something called the Serpent Column of Turkey, and this is in Constantinople. And if you look behind it, you can actually see an Egyptian pillar. So you'll notice that there's a connection here between Egypt and these pillars, or possibly, because you'll find quite often where you find these serpent symbols, you will find these Egyptian pillars in countries they shouldn't be in. And you'll notice here that the pillar is broken. It was broken, I believe, because the Arabs came and they broke it, because it was an idol. And of course, in the Abrahamic religions, idols are forbidden. So this was smashed. But this on the left-hand side is what the pillar used to look like. And you actually see a piece of what the heads looked like in the museum. So here's a piece of what was on the top of the pillar. There were 3 heads. We can move all the way to Africa, though, and we can find the serpent there. We've got Mama Wata. And Mama Wata, believe it or not, your Starbucks lady on the coffee cup with the split tail, it has to do with her as well. So we have serpent worship all over the place. Europe, South America, Asia. We knew Asia. That wasn't a surprise. But it's actually surprising to see how many other continents you'll find this as well. How did this serpent worship get all over the world? If we look at the Hopi Indians, now we're going to North America. We looked at South America, now let's look at North America. Well, we have the serpent dancers or the snake dancers. As a matter of fact, if you know some native people, you might know that some of their tribal leaders, they'll use names like Chief Rattlesnake. And we studied the Indians and we found out that they're not even actually native to America. We found that they're from Eurasia. We proved it through DNA, so there's no question of that. The argument was whether it was through the Bering Strait or whether it was some other route. We found through DNA, though, it was impossible to have happened from the Bering Strait. We also found out that a lot of the Native Americans, they seemed to know Hebrew, which was kind of strange. If we took a look in Ohio, which we looked at recently when we were studying the Gadites, we found that the Cherokee had made these serpent mounds, or at least the serpent mounds were near where the Cherokee were. And we also found the Cherokee had situated a stone of the 10 Commandments, also written in Hebrew. It was interesting because Gad in the Bible was said to scalp his enemies, and he had a lion-like face. He had fringes on his clothes. And the interesting thing that in the tribal memory of the people that lived in North America who aren't native to America, when they do their dances, still to this day, they say the word Aya, which just happens to be the name of God mentioned in Exodus 3:14 to Moses. What a coincidence. God was said by Moses to basically be on one side of this river Jordan, and that he would, as well as a couple of his brothers, would go away from the God of the Bible. They would start to go apostate. Well, it looks like that's exactly what happened, because it looks like the serpent worship followed the Gadites. If we take a look at Tiamat dragon, now we're looking at Samaria. Tiamat was a mother goddess. Yes, that's right. On the left-hand side, this dragon is a mother goddess. And if you look, this is Samaria, but if you know your ancient history, Samaria is the same place that later became Babylon. Iraq, Iran, that's where Samaria is. And of course, Babylon is where the religions split. Here's a really interesting one. This is Mithra. Mithra, you can see all across Europe. Now, the interesting thing about Mithra is actually an Iranian deity. So what was Mithra doing in Europe? Now, this isn't the first time we've seen Iranian deities in Europe. We've seen it actually just a couple seconds ago. But if we take a look at Mithra, what's interesting about it, Mithra, is he has a head of a lion sometimes and the body of a man, or sometimes he has the face of a man. And then if you look at a solar plexus, solar having to do with the sun, on the solar plexus where the Indians would say the heart chakra is, we can see the head of a lion. We can also see that around this lion, there is a serpent wrapped up his body, which is very familiar because, of course, if we look at Hinduism, there's a god Shiva, and Shiva has a serpent wrapped around his head. We can also see that around Mithra in the center picture is a wheel. And if you look carefully, you can see a couple things you should recognize. I pointed out Pisces and Scorpio. Pisces, you see the two fish. Scorpio, you see the scorpion. This would be the zodiac wheel. That would imply that Mithra was some kind of a solar deity. So Mithra has the head of a lion and the body of a man, and he has a serpent wrapped around him, and he has wings just like an angel. I wonder who this could be. Wasn't there someone in the Bible that walked around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour? I thought that was the devil. Deuteronomy 4:19, and beware not to lift your eyes to heaven and see the sun and the moon and the stars and all the host of heaven and be drawn away to worship them. In previous weeks, we've taken a look and we've noticed there seems to be a strong connection between people all across the world where these different pyramid-style temples were and the worship of the heavens, whether it be the sun, the moon, or the stars. It varied upon the culture. But if we take a look at Mithra, what was Mithra engaged with? Well, it looks like it's a solar deity. And the reason we can say that is because typically in old pictures, you would see the sun sitting in the middle of the zodiac wheel. So it looks like Mithra has been substituted in place of the sun. And in Deuteronomy, it specifically says, do not lift your head up and worship the sun. If we take a look in the Encyclopedia Britannica and we take a look at the Persian religion, Mithraism, we can see Mithraism, the worship of Mithra, the Iranian god of the sun. So it's not speculation, it's right there. Yes, Mithra was a sun god. He was a god of justice, contract, and war in pre-Zoroastrian Iran, known as Mithras in the Roman Empire during the 2nd and 3rd centuries. So this was a god that was worshipped in Rome after Christ. This deity was honored as the patron of loyalty to the emperor. So in other words, we have emperors of Rome. There was a connection with the emperors and Mithra. Here's something interesting, and we'll look at this later. After the acceptance of Christianity by Emperor Constantine in the early 4th century, Mithraism rapidly declined. That's interesting because we can see up to the 3rd century, which is right up until Constantine, this was the religion in Rome. I wonder if Constantine had any connection to this religion, and we will examine this later. If you think Mithraism was nothing, well, take a look at the map here. These are all the known, or not all of them, these are some of the known temples to Mithra. So if you haven't heard of Mithra, well, Mithra was all over Europe, parts of Africa, Spain, Asia, going into Egypt. Mithra was a widespread religion going right into London. It's a big deal. These temples typically were underground, and it was typically a cult that was associated to kings and soldiers. As a matter of fact, Mithra has other names, and we'll find some of the other names of Mithra, and we'll see that still today, Mithra is being honored by the royal family. We can also take a look at the Vikings. The Vikings, they sailed throughout, well, a lot of Europe. They came down the rivers. They had these very interesting looking boats, and on their boats, we can see that there was serpents or dragons on the head of the boat. So now we're seeing a connection with the Vikings, but also the Celtic people. And if you know the story of St. Patrick, or the idea of shooing snakes out of Ireland, those snakes were pagans. And if we've noticed, there's two types of snake. There is a sun and a moon, or a male and a female. So when they were actually chasing these serpents out of Europe, what were they really referring to? Well, it was the dominance of the Christian religion taking out these other religions that had to do with the worship of these elementals, or the sun, the moon, and the stars. These things that were in the sky, idols, we call them. It's called astrolatry. And God told Moses and his people, have nothing to do with this, have nothing to do with the people and the nations that have anything to do with this. It doesn't matter if they worship the sun, it doesn't matter if they worship the moon, or any of the holidays associated to that. God said, be separate. The word holy means to be separate. You have to be apart from these people.
The enigma of the lost tribes of Israel has puzzled Bible scholars for centuries. Millions of Israelites just disappeared and vanished into history forever, never to be seen again, whilst around the same time period, millions of people just magically appeared, becoming what we call the Germanic tribes. I'm sure it's all just a coincidence. Welcome to the first part of a new series where we will uncover where each tribe of Israel is located today, where we will examine the evidence, explore the clues, and uncover lost history and piece together what we can find out, starting with the tribe of Dan. In the early Greek classical literature, Diodorus Siculus mentions a Moses leading his people, the Israelites, out of Egypt during the Exodus into a region called Judea. This shows that there are in fact records of the 12 tribes even in the Greek classics. But also mentioned is that a vast number, instead of following Moses, rallied together and sailed for Greece. So many of the Greeks were in fact Israelites, even though they didn't realize it. They were led by Zara's descendants, Dada and Calcol, the kingly line from Judah. Now this was the beginning of the prophecy that all Adamic nations would gradually be replaced by Israelites. The promises Yahweh God made. Dada is known for settling the region that he named Dardania, and later his descendants set up Troy, whilst Calcol is known for setting up the city Thebes and introducing the Hebrew Phoenician alphabet. But there is also another group that came with them called the Danans or Danoi. They settled in Achaia, the northern part of the Peloponnesus Peninsula of Greece, so they were also called Achaeans. They were said to be descended from a Danaus the Egyptian. He was a legendary leader, and according to the legend, he was a son of Abelus, king of Egypt. The truth no doubt got confounded a bit, and these were certainly the Israelite tribe of Dan, who was the son of Bela. The island Sardinia was even named after them, Shardania, meaning remnant of Dan. It still bears that name today. How interesting that a place would bear the name of Dan. Jacob prophesied concerning Dan that wherever his descendants were to go, they would leave a serpent's path. The snake, as it slithers along the ground, it leaves a trail or a track. In the same manner, Dan's descendants would do this by leaving signs and waymarks throughout their travels and the migration routes they followed. In other words, they would name the places they traveled and settled to after their patriarch Dan. We even see this demonstrated in the Old Testament. Dan originally lived in a territory next to Ephraim, Benjamin, and Judah, and also the Philistines. During the Judges period, 600 Danaanites sought a new territory in the north of Canaan, and on their way they camped in a place in Judah which the Danaanites called Manahath Dan, meaning Camp of Dan. After they had smitten the people of Laish with the sword and burned the city, they called the new city Dan. The children of Dan continued this practice throughout their migrations, and we can find a trail of names all throughout Europe. In Hebrew there are no vowels, so the name Dan is written DN, or its Hebrew equivalent, so words like Dan, Din, Don, Dun, Den, or DN correspond to the name of Dan. Just take a look at the names of the rivers of Europe. We have the Danube, the Dnieper, the Danyester, the Danau, the Daci, the Davy, the Dan, the Don, the Udon, the Eridon, and thousands of others, Dans and Dons, of ancient and early geography. However, it is not just limited to rivers, but also towns, cities, settlements, and as we will find out, even entire nations would bear the name of Dan. Greece wasn't the only place with a people called Dan. The early Irish history also tells us of a people called the Tuatha De Danann, which literally means the people of Dan. They were said to be descended from a Dana, which is obviously Dan. They arrived in several waves of migrations, roughly between 1200 and 800 BC. Now this would be around the Judges period, and when we examine the text of the book of the Judges, this fits perfectly. The song of Deborah and Barak during the ongoing battle, it asked, why did Dan remain in ships? And Dan abode in ships. Dan did not participate, so what were they up to? The territory of the tribe of Dan had a major seaport, Joppa, giving them easy access to ships, and some must have been seafarers. Evidently, some chose to migrate rather than get involved in the battles, and some must have reached the coast of Ireland. Upon their arrival, they conquered the Furbolgs, a race of people who were living in Ireland at the time, who likely were Japhethites. The Danites ruled Ireland from then on until the arrival of the Malaysians, who were another branch of the Israelites. They had several battles until peace was established, but from then on, Ireland was ruled by the Malaysian kings. This demonstrates how far and wide the Danites were travelling to. The Viper's Trail was not just the rivers, but many towns and settlements were also named after Dan. In Northern Ireland we have Donegal, which means Fort of Dan, and in Scotland we have the River Don. Throughout Europe we have many guideposts and waymarks left by Dan. The city Dunkirk, meaning Church of Dan, Dundee, Dunbar, Dunraven, Edinburgh, and even London. If anything, this demonstrates that the tribe of Dan were continuously migrating into Europe. So did the tribe of Dan ever claim a country for themselves? Is there any land in the world named after Dan? Denmark, the name of the modern country in Europe north of Germany, literally means Dan's mark, Dan's land, Dan's last resting place. Its people are called the Danes. According to their legends, they originated from a patriarch called Dan. The first king allegedly to rule over Denmark was also called Dan, as well as many later kings were also named Dan. In addition, because at one time Denmark ruled all the surrounding regions, the whole region took its name from them, the Scandinavian Peninsula. Clearly, here are the remnants of the people of Dan who migrated westward overland from the Caucasus to the present location in northern Europe.
Genesis 49:17. Dan shall be a serpent in the way, a viper by the path, that bites the horse's heels, so his riders fall backward. This was a prophecy about Dan. Everywhere Dan goes, he moves like a serpent. You can see the trail that he leaves behind. This brother, he's not mentioned in the book of Revelation, which means that he went in a different direction. And if you see the symbol of the serpent or the symbol of the dragon that follows Dan everywhere, it's kind of interesting, especially when you take a look that we just talked about Ireland. Well, if Dan made his way all the way to Ireland, that's kind of interesting because the cult of Mithra, which had to do with solar worship, which had the symbol of a serpent and a lion, well, that was out there too. How did it get there? So we're starting to see how these religions that were actually isolated towards Iran, the cradle of civilization, Mesopotamia, and how they all just started to travel outward to other places. It's really interesting because when you look at the Bible, you see all these lineages, so-and-so begot so-and-so, and a lot of us just skip it. We're like, I can't remember all these names, and they're weird names anyway. But if you actually take the time and you go through some of your old history books, especially ancient history books, you can actually find these names. And you can see that these lineages that you thought were completely irrelevant, they're actually explaining to you where some of those people went. So Dan, you can tell in the Bible, actually, without even looking outside of history books, that he would name places where he went. So in the Bible, you will see that when Dan traveled away from his home, he started to name those places after his father. That's what the children did. And so when you start to see places like Dun or Din or Den, it's all based on the word Dan, because remember, Hebrew, there's no vowels, just consonants. So DN, that's all you would see in Hebrew. That's why you have all these different places that are based off of the letters DN. And in Judges 5:17, Judges 5:17 said that Dan would travel on ships. As a matter of fact, he was missing for a battle. The reason he was missing for a battle is because he's out sailing. So it's really important that you understand that the Bible is not a fairy tale. It's history. And if you think you know history and you don't know the Bible, you don't really know as much history as you think. In Revelation 7:4-8, it talks about the 144,000. It says, "And I heard the number of them which were sealed, and there were sealed 144,000 of all the tribes of the children of Israel." We can see Judah, 12,000. So there's 12,000 from each tribe. But notice this: Judah, Reuben, Gad, Asher, Naphtali, Manasseh, Simeon, Levi, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, Benjamin. We're missing two. As a matter of fact, Joseph was placed in there, and he wasn't one of the 12. We had Ephraim, actually, my apologies. We have Manasseh, which was one of the sons of Joseph. Joseph was one of the 12. We have Manasseh, which was one of the sons of Joseph. But Joseph had two children. One was Manasseh, one was Ephraim. Well, we can see here that Ephraim's not listed here, but for some reason Manasseh is. So it's like Joseph got a double portion in this list, himself and one of his children. Who's missing though? There's no tribe of Dan. So Dan, the tribe referred to as the serpent, just happens not to be mentioned, which means in Revelation, it says Dan is not sealed. So if Dan is not sealed and you see the symbol of a dragon or the symbol of a serpent that follows Dan, if you're following the same ideology as Dan, don't be surprised if you're not sealed either. What was the seal about? It was in the book of Deuteronomy. The seal had to do with the 10 commandments. Have no other gods before me. Was that not the first commandment? What did Dan do? Well, must have done something different because Dan has the serpent symbol that follows him everywhere. So again, if you think that these different ritualistic holidays, which are attached to these different deities, are no big deal, it was for Dan because Dan's not in the book of Revelation, which means the kingdom of heaven is not an inheritance for Dan. So I would suspect if God's going to be fair, whoever chooses the same path that Dan chose, either ignorantly or knowingly, you would get the same outcome. You're not sealed.
The ships constructed by the Norse were long and slender. They were very low down. The shallow draft of the Norse warships had several advantages. The Norse could raid well inland by sailing far up rivers that were normally way too shallow for typical seagoing vessels of the day. The Frankish kingdoms in present-day France were astonished by the Norse raids in unthinkable location, hundreds of kilometers inland on rivers not thought possible to be navigatable. In addition, they had a serpent or dragon head placed on the front. Thus in many ways they sailed like snakes or serpents down the rivers and through the oceans and seas. When you consider this with the Viper's Trail prophecy of the Danes, it is startlingly accurate. The Long Serpent, or the Ormen Lang, was the most legendary warship and the pride of the Norwegian king Olaf. It was built on special orders of Trigason, who had captured a similar but smaller dragon ship. This one had to be far larger and more carefully put together. Snorri Sturluson wrote in Heimskringla, it was exceptionally long, built on the model Drakar, and its stem and stern were gilded. The ship was long, broad, high-sided and strongly timbered. The ship was a dragon.
So those who follow the dragon do not have the seal. Anyone that's attached to the Celtic religion, anyone that's attached to the things that Dan would worship, you're not sealed. You're following other gods unknowingly. We also see a dragon in the Old Testament. It's actually in the Apocrypha. It's called The History of the Destruction of Bel and the Dragon. It's actually based on the book of Daniel. In the book of Daniel, we see that Daniel goes into a lion's den. Well, notice that Mithra had the head of a lion, but a serpent wrapped around him. So here we see a book that's associated to Daniel, and we see a dragon instead of a lion. Notice the overlap here. And it says Bel, which we know is also Baal. Now, if we take a look at Egypt, because of course, who are the Egyptians? They were Mizraim. Mizraim, well, that's the son of Ham. Ham, or the Hamites, we're talking about Noah now. So Noah had 3 children, Japheth, Ham, and Shem. Ham had done something to his father, and he was cursed, at least his youngest. His youngest was Canaan, and they were the Canaanites. And the Canaanites were the ones that were taken out of the promised land. They were supposed to be in Africa. That's where the Hamites were supposed to be. But Canaan, he went off and he went into the land of Shem. The land of Shem, eventually he got cleared out of. And that was in the days of Joshua and his conquests. Notice here that the Egyptians, or Mizraim as the Bible would call it, they have this uraeus serpent that's coming out of the head of the Pharaoh. We have a vulture, but we also have a uraeus serpent. So again, more serpent symbolism. So where do you think that Dan might have learned some of what he learned? Probably from the Canaanites. If the Canaanites have a serpent symbol, and we see that Egypt has a serpent symbol, well, we can start to put together here who's learning what religion and how it's not okay. Because if the people were destroyed in the land of Canaan, their religion was obviously no good. If we take a look here, we can see Osiris and Isis in Egypt. On the left, obviously Osiris. On the right, we have Isis. Now, we've studied Isis. We looked into her with Mother's Day, for example. And you can see she has the crescent moon and a sun inside of it. So when you think about this, imagine how a woman holds a child. You have the arms, which are clasped together, kind of in a U shape, like the crescent moon. And the child would be the sun, I guess, if it was a male. Not S-O-N, though. It's S-U-N. So it's the sun being cradled between the lunar horns. And if you take a look at Osiris, who was supposed to be a solar deity, what do we notice? He's holding a crook and a cane. That looks like the candy cane at Christmas time. Yeah, it's a shepherd's crook. What's that for? It's for guiding sheep. That's interesting because we already have a shepherd. That shepherd is Christ. Which shepherd is this? Is there another shepherd mentioned in the Bible? Yes, there's a false shepherd. In Zechariah, it mentions that the false shepherd would leave the flock and he would be blinded in his right eye. We also know that Isis is Aphrodite. So when the Romans, or sorry, the Greeks, when they had their goddess Aphrodite, which was the Roman Venus, this is Isis. So these gods and goddesses are all connected and they're all over the world. But it's going to get more interesting. If we take a look, we can see Isis and Osiris, but what do we see on the right-hand side? Well, this is a rock bust from Egypt, and we can see that there is a serpent with a hat that looks like Osiris, and another serpent that looks like Isis. And when we looked at these other places in the world, like China, and we looked over at other parts of Asia, and we looked at North America, South America, what do we notice about the serpents? Sometimes male, sometimes female. So where do you think it came from? Remember, Babylon was the place where religion was divided. And we showed that in Babylon, we could make connections to Egypt. And then Egypt, we could see that this queen of heaven that was mentioned in the book of Jeremiah, she was actually Isis. That was an Egyptian goddess. We also saw that the Edomites had a connection to this Egyptian goddess. They were in Jordan. And then we saw that in Asia, there was a Madonna holding a child, just like Isis. It's the same religion. Both Osiris and Isis were depicted as serpents. One was the sun, the other was the moon. This sounds like some kind of a double dragon. We have a blue moon. You've ever heard the term once in a blue moon? Then we got the red sun. When you take a look at this system that we've seen all over the world, it's associated to transcendental meditation, magic. You look at this, you can even see the caduceus, the medical symbol. And we know it's not the medical symbol. It actually said that the US Army made a mistake, and now we think it's the medical symbol, but it's actually a symbol that goes back to witchcraft. The god Hermes used to hold this staff. Hermes was the flying god. What do we know about the symbol of flying in the ancient world? When someone flies, it means they're getting high. We know that in the Bible, sorcery is translated as the word pharmakia. Pharmakia is where you get the word pharmacy. Pharmakia, or sorcery, was the usage of drugs. Drugs get you high. Through altered states of consciousness, people would be able to see these forces, these powers. Ephesians 6:12, forces and principalities in the heavenly places, the high places. Pagans worshipped from the high places. We can see one is associated to the moon, one is associated to the sun, just like the yin and yang. The middle one is the child. So what are we looking at here? The Trinity. There is no Trinity in the Bible. If you think that it's a Trinity, you have to open up Psalms 82. In Psalms 82, you will not get the idea of a Trinity. You'll see that there are more. Because, of course, what you're forgetting is, yes, Father, Son, Holy Spirit are working towards one cause. They are Elohim. But the angels are also referred to as Elohim as well. They are celestial beings. The word Elohim refers to anything in heaven, not just Father, Son, Holy Spirit. That's why Trinitarianism actually points you back to this religion from Babylon. It's a religion like a triangle. This was something that the early church had to fight against, because since you had all this Asian Mesopotamian religion that was around them, they started to blur the lines. So instead of having the Father and the Son and the Spirit being separate, you can see that these three are intertwined. They're all connected. That's why you see some Christian denominations today, they think that the Father, the Son, the Spirit, they think it's the same person. No, they are three distinct persons. How do we know? When John baptized Jesus, it couldn't be any more obvious. John baptizes Jesus the Son, and he's in the river Jordan. What happens? The Holy Spirit rains down on Christ. And then the Father says, "This is my Son who I am pleased." This is not schizophrenia. This is three separate persons. When Christ was on the cross and he was crucified, he said, "My Father, why do you forsake me?" looking up to the heavens. Again, he's not talking to himself. So this Egyptian Trinity that was also seen in Buddhism, it was also seen in Hinduism, and Buddhism is a child of Hinduism. Buddha was a Hindu. What you're seeing is the same religion being recycled over and over and over again, being so close to where the Israelites are and where the Bible is being disseminated amongst the nations that it starts to blur the lines. Your job as a believer is to separate. You need to become holy. You need to separate yourself from all this intermixing. The word Babylon, which is where this came from, Babylon or Babel is the word confusion, but it's a confusion through mixing. They're mixing truth with lie, and you're getting confused. If you take a look, you can see on the left, we have the yin. On the right, we have the yang. One is feminine, one is masculine. Let's look at some of the qualities of each. Feminine, patient, passive. Well, that sounds like a feminine energy. If we look at the male, active. Okay, so we have the receiver and we have the aggressor. When we look at the feminine, we have an internal energy. With the male, we have the external energy. Can you see the opposites here? We have feminine, introspection, we have male, assertion. Yin, we have compassion. Are women more compassionate than men as a whole? Probably. Valor, that definitely sounds like something a soldier would have. Yielding, dominating. Nurturing, initiating. Here's an important one. Right brain intuitive, left brain logical. It's not to say that women can't be logical, but it doesn't matter whether you look at Christianity or the ancient world. People knew that men and women are different. We are biologically different, meaning that men tend to live more in their left brain. They look to reason at things and they look at the intimate details. And women are more intuitive, more emotional. They live more in their right brain. They're more creative and they see the big picture. That's why man and woman need to work together. So the man can reason his way through a problem. The woman can help provide extra details and provide that bigger picture. And together, through that synergy, both male and female will make their way to the kingdom. They can't do it by themselves as effectively. So it's not that one is lesser and one is greater. They're just different. If I talk about a car engine and everyone wanted to be the engine and nobody wanted to be the carburetor or nobody wanted to be the transmission, how do you have a vehicle that works? The family is no different. When Satan comes in and attacks the family, he makes women feel like they're lesser, and I'll show you why he does it. And then he tries to make men sound like they're greater. This complete perversion of the family causes families to break apart. Then women want to have dominance. They want to have strength. They want to have power. And then men, if the women take the power and the dominance and the strength, by default, you become feminized. This is exactly what Satan has been trying to do for years. And both men and women have played into it because they won't acknowledge their biological differences because they think it's offensive these days. It's ridiculous. But even the ancients knew this is how you're composed. Even the serpent, the one that's against you, taught the right thing, even though he tried to pull you off the path, or she tried to pull you off the path. Because you can see the serpent is coming at you with a crossfire, both male and female. So my question for you is, do two wrongs make one Christ? If you choose the sun, if you choose the moon, the solar holidays, or the lunar holidays, do you get one Christ? No, you won't find Christ in any of those holidays. You've got 9 holidays in the Bible, 7 of which God gave you. Why were none of them good enough? Because you've replaced them with these ones. Here's the Queen of Heaven. We've studied her on Mother's Day, right? Isis, or in the Bible, her name explicitly stated was Astarte. So on top of Astarte's head, she's the white-looking statue. You can see she has the crescent moon. Clearly, you can tell this is the same goddess that was worshipped in Egypt. Why would she be called the Queen of Heaven? Take a look at Isis and her wings. Sure looks like she can fly. She might actually be an angel. When we studied Isis, we saw that she was an Egyptian goddess who spread her wings across Europe. We saw pyramids across Europe. We saw Isis. Paris looks like it gets its name from Isis. And even if that's not correct, we can clearly see that the coat of arms of France has Isis associated to it. We saw that last week. Researchers also unearthed a few articles related to the ancient Egyptian civilization in the territory of what is now Poland. The most unexpected items were the statuettes of the goddess Isis. What are statues of Isis doing in Poland? Well, what are mythariums from Persia doing in London? What are they doing in Germany? What are they doing across Europe? Why are these 2 serpent religions coming all the way from the east, all the way from Iraq, Iran, Samaria, Babylon? How do they make it everywhere? People brought them. However, the descriptions and some photographs allow one to suppose that there were a fascinating story behind these artifacts. Here's the important piece. It seems that they were not just souvenirs which had arrived to Central Europe from a faraway land. These weren't souvenirs. This is what the people believed. They didn't call places after Isis. They didn't have temples of Isis in Italy because these were just souvenirs from the East. This was their ideological system. One of the bronze statues discovered in Western Poland had the horns and the solar disk of Isis cut in a very specific way. So why'd they cut them off? Well, because if you cut off these horns from the top of Isis, it sure looks a lot like this Virgin Mary. And remember, these pictures were drawn by who? mystics, spiritualists. People like Da Vinci didn't believe in the Bible. They believed in the mysteries. They were drawing solar and lunar deities personified as people. So this isn't some coincidence. This is people that rejected the Bible, put their own beliefs and blurred the lines and confused everyone else. This is ISIS. It was always ISIS. That's why the Vatican says on their website, Mary is the Queen of Heaven. It's not the Mary, the mother of Christ. It's ISIS that they're referring to. Why do you think they have an Egyptian obelisk in front of the Vatican? These are not coincidences. Why did someone cut off these characteristics? It's easy to explain. During the period of early Christianity in Europe, people noticed a similarity between Isis, Horus. Horus is also called Harpocrates. Just so you understand, this child is known as the god of silence. So when you see celebrities, politicians, billionaires walking up in the weirdest context, maybe on the red carpet, for example, and they put their finger over their lips and they make that symbol, they're not doing it just because they want the crowd to be quiet. They're letting you know that they are the child Horus. They are the child Harpocrates. Let me give you an example. Kanye West. What did Kanye West wear around his neck? A giant falcon. And the falcon was the symbol for Horus. Kanye West made it abundantly clear what he was and what religion is. It's the rest of us that are blinded. So what they did was they took Egyptian deities and blurred them with the Bible. And interestingly enough, here's the point you have to face. You either say, A, that the Egyptian deities, which are also the Hindu deities, the Asian deities, they're the same thing as Mary and Jesus. Because if you say that, here's the problem. They're also the serpent. They're also the serpent. Remember, Isis and Osiris were depicted as serpents. So if you believe that Mary and Christ are the same thing as Isis and Horus, okay, well then I guess Christ was the serpent. It makes no sense when you read the Bible and you see in Genesis 3, there was a serpent that came and had an enmity with woman, and then later what? The woman was the serpent and the child was the serpent? That doesn't make any logical sense. We can see the virgin and child in Asia. Why is that important? Because we also saw what? Serpents in Asia. Notice how this theme goes together. We get serpents in a country. We also get this Madonna and a child in the same country. And it's like, well, maybe that's just a random woman holding her child. There is a solar halo behind their heads. It's very distinct. You can see this in Europe in the same places where there was serpent worship. So you can see this has to do with the sun. And if you notice, the child kind of looks androgynous because in some pictures it's male, in other pictures, female. And if you look at the last picture on the far right, you'll notice that the child is holding something you will actually see in the Catholic Church. And I'll also point out that if you look at the old symbol of the Roman Empire, the double-headed eagle or the double-headed phoenix or bird or whatever it was, you'll see that that bird had that symbol in its hands. Look across the world. All these places where the serpent was worshipped, what else did you see? The mother and the child. They're just trying to throw you off. The serpent is clever. We're going to take a look in the Bible and we're going to see what the serpent's attributes are. The serpent is crafty. The serpent is intelligent. It's us that are foolish. Whether we look at Devaki and Krishna, Isis and Horus, hey, how about Babylon, where this started? Semiramis and Tammuz. How about Shingmu? How about Kuan Yin? And then how about not Mary and Jesus? They're blurring the lines. And when people don't care that they're mixing paganism with Christianity, you understand the confusion you're doing to yourself and to others. You need to be holy. You need to be separate. Or otherwise, just identify as one of these faiths and don't call yourself a Christian. You make it very confusing for everyone else when you say it's okay to blur the lines, but God says, be holy, be separate. Pyramids and serpent worship. We looked last week and we saw the pyramids were associated to the constellation Orion. Orion in the Bible, what's it associated to? The word to be stupid. I'll repeat that. The word Orion in the Bible, which all these pyramid structures are pointing to, is associated to the word to be stupid. We see the temple of Kukulkan in Mexico. Well, that's a pyramid, and that's got a serpent. We see Kokor Temple in Cambodia. We keep seeing this Madonna and her child, and then what? These serpents. And notice, this is just like Hinduism. Look at the serpent on the right and notice there are 7 heads, like the 7 chakras. So the 7 chakras were about raising the Kundalini serpent up the spinal cord and then opening the third eye. What does Mary and Jesus have to do with opening the third eye? Nothing. We can go to Japan too, but we won't find it in Japan above ground. We have to look in the ocean. In the ocean, you'll find the Yonaguni Pyramid. This is massive. You can tell by the scuba diver. But here you go. We saw that there's tons of dragons in the land of the rising sun. I'll repeat that, the land of the rising sun. We see lots of dragons, and here we see, there's the pyramid. We already looked at Japan and we looked at this earth goddess, but sometimes we're seeing this feminine figure. Other times we're seeing a masculine figure. And we've already taken a look and we've noticed that Beauty and the Beast, she was a conjoined twin. Beauty and the Beast was actually the Roman god Janus. Janus had a female head and a male head. And during the Renaissance period, what did we notice? That the Renaissance art had this kind of Siamese twin with a male head and a female head with a sun and a moon. How is that any different than this religion we've been studying that was in Asia, Africa, but where did it come from? Genesis 11 says, Babylon. God said, when you tried to build this tower and challenge, what did he do? He scattered you. He scattered you from one end of the earth to the other. But then people thought, oh, we'll outsmart him. How will we outsmart him? Since he divided our language, we'll start talking with symbols. Because if we use symbols, it's a universal language. We don't have to worry about the language barrier from China to North America. We don't have to worry about the language barrier from South America to Africa. If we all talk with symbols, we can still communicate even if God was to divide our tongues even further. I'm not going to try to pronounce this. I'll probably butcher it, but we've got, actually, you know what? Let me try. Sri Ranganatha Temple in India. Again, a pyramid structure. And if you look at the top, you can see that's a serpent's head. Pyramids, serpents, God and a goddess, a child and a mother. And if you take a look here, we can see this temple was dedicated to Ranganathar, an aspect of Vishnu. So we saw Vishnu and Parvati. That was, the blue one was Vishnu, the red one was Parvati. And if we take a look here, what's behind his head? A bunch of serpents. Very interesting. We see the same theme over and over and over again. Are you starting to be convinced that you're looking at the same religion, just stylized a little bit differently? We've got the Vashtu temple in India. Again, another pyramid structure. And are there serpents? Yeah, in India you had the Naga serpents. In Egypt you had the Naga serpents. How did you get serpents in India called Naga, but then you also had serpents in Egypt called Naga? Because this ideology came from the same place. And of course, if we look at some of these temples, they're actually built after the body. And so these points line up with the chakras. So you can tell that the temples themselves had something to do with the body of the people that went in to go worship. So in other words, when you're in the temple, it's like being inside of a human being. But that's really interesting because God had a temple too. He had this tabernacle that Moses carried around in Exodus, and the tabernacle became Solomon's temple. And then later it was destroyed. And then we had this second temple, or Zerubbabel's temple, or Herod's temple. And now the temple's gone. All we have now is a temple mount, and people are fighting over it. In the book of Ezekiel, God actually told the people, or he said to the prophet, the people were starting to look at the temple as some kind of an idol. They were looking at it and bragging like this temple had some kind of a life to it. The temple itself was nothing. It was just basically a place where the presence of God could come, but the presence of God didn't come to the temple after they defiled it and then built the second temple. The temple itself was representing the heavenly temple, the New Jerusalem, heaven. That's what the temple was representing. It's funny how we see that in the New Testament, Satan goes after mankind by basically appealing to the things that mankind wants. So when we look at Peter, for example, Peter was actually called Satan by Christ. He was in the wrong spirit. Christ needed to be crucified, but then what did Peter do? Peter said, stop, I don't want you to be crucified. He was having a great time. He's there with God, they're together. But what did Christ recognize? Peter, you're in that spirit of the serpent. You are trying to defy what the heavens are trying to accomplish. You're trying to defy God. He knew that this wasn't Peter. This was a spirit working through Peter. And we've studied that spirits work through people. I can't get that through people's heads enough. Spirits work through people. So all these gods that you see and goddesses and all these weird things that, just seem like make-believe. No, what these are is these are energies. These are spiritual forces. If the Kundalini serpent is going up the spinal cord, what do you think we're dealing with? The nervous system. People are hacking their nervous system. They do it through meditation. They do it through mantra, vibrations. Vibrations are changing their conscious awareness. Drugs are changing their conscious awareness. Altered states of mind are opening you to spiritual energies. They call the Kundalini the serpent of fire. Well, remember, we have two serpents, right? So there must be a serpent of fire and a serpent of water. I guess that's why they had the Ida and the Pingala. Those were the two energies that went up the spine, the male and the female. And we've been seeing both the male and the female across the world. For example, we looked at Mithra. Mithra was obviously one type of a serpent because that was associated to fire, the sun. But then we look in China and we see what? Lunar New Year. So do you think the lunar serpent is the same as the solar serpent? No, they are very different. They're two different energies. One is an active energy, one is a receptive energy. And they've been fighting for all of history. India has endless examples of serpent worship. We don't have to go there. I couldn't show you all these different temples. You just can go online and Google and check for yourself. You'll find endless images of people either with half bodies of people and the other half being serpents, or serpents behind their head, or serpents around them intertwined like Mithra. It's endless. It's endless. If we go to China, here's one that's not as clear. And again, I'll try to do my pronunciation on most of these the best I can. This one's not too bad. Qinshi Mausoleum. Qinshi Mausoleum on the left, that's what it would have looked like a long time ago. But now it looks like a hill. It looks like a mountain. It looks like a mound. In other words, over time, its templeness kind of deteriorated because stuff grew on top of it. I mean, we're talking thousands of years with some of these temples. But again, we have serpents in these countries or dragons in these countries, and then we have these pyramids, or in this case, a mound. And again, remember, when we look at China, we can see that there's all kinds of different serpents. But here, you want to see the male and the female serpent? The same thing you can find in Europe. You can find right here. Fuzi and Nuwa, China, right here. They're two intertwined serpents. That's just like the Kabbalah. The Kabbalah, where you see these 11 or 10 is what it's supposed to be, the Sephirah. And the Sephirah, we know, they translate to the chakras. Why would they translate? Because it's the same system. It's a world religion. And it made it all the way to Ohio. Ohio, we found the 10 Commandments. Who put them there? Looked like the Cherokee did. It was definitely native people of some sort who weren't native to America. They weren't from North America. They were from Eurasia. They spoke Hebrew. They wrote Hebrew. We've proved it. And here we find a serpent mound. Did the Gadites walk away from their God? Well, did Moses say that they would? And you can see the serpent mound is actually shaped like a serpent. And it's basically like a hilly looking thing. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a pyramid. It could also just be a hill, a mound. How about Newgrange Mound in Ireland? What do you think this is? What do you think all these mounds are? All these pyramids, all these ziggurats? It had to do with either a lunar or a solar serpent. Wasn't there the story in Ireland of serpents being chased out? Haven't we equated the serpents to being pagans? Didn't the Christians come in and all of a sudden Christianized nations tell them, hey, look, you're bad people. You just don't know who God is. Here, let us tell you who God is. Stop worshiping these worthless elementals. Don't worship the sun, the moon, and the stars. They are not your creators. They are enslaving you. It says in the book of Galatians. The Galatians we know are the Celts. The Galatians were from Turkey. Turkey is where we saw that serpent column in Constantinople. These people are enslaved to things, these holidays that are not holidays, and they don't even know. And every time that you participate these elementals just become more and more able to influence you. How do they influence you? Well, how does the Kundalini serpent work? Through the nervous system. When you open yourself to these spiritual forces, you do so because of sin. We can't even go through all the different pyramids in the world. There's just too many, but here's a couple. Ziggurat of Tepe, and again, excuse my pronunciation, Siliak. So this is Iran. Pyramids of Djoser. We also have Giza. We've got Pyramid of Khufu. We've got Ziggurat of that's Iraq. We've got Chogha Zanbil, that's Iran. We've got Tomb of King Kashta, that's Nubia. We've got Kinshi Mausoleum. We looked at that one. We've got the Pyramid of the Sun in Mexico. That's another pyramid. We've got the Tomb of the General. That's the city of Zhan, China. We've got Borobudur Temple, Indonesia. Prang Temple, Cambodia. El Castillo, Mexico. How many of you want to bet you're going to find either a serpent or a dragon at these locations, or something having to do with that culture? You already know. You already know. Now we're really going to focus on the scriptures and find out where exactly did the serpent worship come from. And most of you should know as Christians, it shouldn't be a surprise. Historians, scholars who reject the Bible, they can pretend to be confused about the origin of the serpent. But anyone who studies the Bible knows where the serpent came from. Genesis 3. This is the first time in the Bible we see this serpent. Now the serpent was more crafty than any beast of the field the Lord God had made. And he said to the woman, did God really say, you must not eat from any tree in the garden? So right here, the serpent is questioning God, or at least questioning the woman on what God said. The woman answered the serpent, we may eat the fruit of the trees of the garden, but about the fruit of the tree in the middle of the garden, God has said, you must not eat of it or touch it, or you will die. So Eve knew that death would come from eating from a specific tree. But then the serpent responds, you will not surely die, the serpent told her. For God knows that in the day you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will become like God, knowing good and evil. We first see the serpent in Genesis 3, and what do we know about him? The serpent was the craftiest of the beasts the God had made. We're going to actually look more carefully to figure out what this word crafty means, so you understand what the serpent's doing. The serpent challenged what God had said and made Eve doubt what God said. So what's one of the major tactics of the serpent? Doubt. Make you doubt God. So if you're looking for the serpent, you'll find that the serpent will be associated to people that are trying to make you doubt the Bible, trying to make you doubt the legitimacy of God's word. The serpent will always introduce doubt. The serpent opened the eyes of Adam and Eve once they disobeyed and ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. The serpent said they would be like God. Now notice, it's not God, it's like God, knowing good and evil. So the serpent tempted them. The serpent tempted the woman specifically and said, you can be like God. So in other words, what is the woman being tempted with? Taking God's place of authority. That's ultimately what's going on here. The serpent thought he would have a better chance tempting the woman with taking the position of God. So what do you think the serpent's actually preying on? If you have men and women, biologically, we know we're different. Who's stronger physically? The male. So if the male wants to dominate the female by force, can he? Absolutely. What is the serpent offering the woman? Authority. I will give you authority. If we take a look at the word crafty, it's 6175, arum. It means crafty, shrewd, sensible. Let's do a little bit of a deeper dive. Passive participle of aram, cunning, usually in a bad sense. So the serpent is cunning. He's smart. Remember, deceptive. So the definition, we see crafty, shrewd, sensible. What's shrewd mean? Shrewd, having or showing sharp powers of judgment, astute. So the serpent knew right from wrong. And then notice when we look at some similar words, intelligent, intelligent. Matthew 10 and 16, behold, I send you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. Therefore be what? Wise as serpents. Oh, the serpent's wise, is he? Yeah, he's shrewd. He's intelligent. And harmless as doves. The serpent is the most intelligent. That's really important. And when it says beasts, it doesn't say beasts. It says of all the living things God created. Out of everything that God created, remember, through the Lord God, through Christ, all things were made. Through Christ, all things were made. The most intelligent creature that Christ made was the serpent. Do not underestimate. Genesis 3:1. Now the serpent was more crafty than any beast. So crafty is shrewd. Shrewd is intelligent. He is the most intelligent beast of the field that the Lord God had made. And he said to the woman, did God really say you must not eat from the tree in the garden? Well, if you're shrewd, that means you have good judgment. So did the serpent not have good judgment? Did the serpent not know that that tree was forbidden? Of course he did. And the woman told him that the tree was forbidden. But he was challenging God. And he thought, well, the woman probably wants more authority. Take a look at this word beast. The word beast is actually the word shay, which is alive or living. So out of any living creature that was created, this was the smartest one. Do you think that the serpent had a pretty good in? I'd say so. The Bible teaches the serpent was the most intelligent living thing created. That's right, not mankind, not Adam or Eve. The serpent was smarter. Serpents are associated to wisdom. And that's not just in the Bible, that's across the world. Start researching. You'll find that there's wisdom gods and wisdom goddesses. And you're going to find serpent symbolism. Chinese Buddhist Encyclopedia, serpent or dragon spirits. Look at that, serpent or dragon. So this isn't the Bible, this isn't Revelation, this is Buddhism. Serpents and dragons, there's an overlap here. In esotericism, however, and as already stated, this is a nickname for wise men or adepts. So the smart people in the occult, what are they called? The serpents or the dragons. You know what? Isn't there a TV show? Has to do with making a business, Dragon's Den. Isn't a bunch of business people, they come together and they try to figure out what are the best business ideas and then they give you some money? Well, they're called the dragons, aren't they? Yeah, they're the wise men. They're the adepts. Do you think that this symbolism has disappeared? In China and Tibet, the dragons are regarded as tutelary deities. Tutelary means guardian, like guardian spirit of the world and of various spots on the earth. And the word is explained as meaning adepts, yogis, and narjals. The term has simply reference to their great knowledge and wisdom. Wow, look at this. So just like the Bible, the serpent, the dragons, they're very wise. This is also proven in the ancient sutras and the Buddha's biographies. The Naga, which we saw both in India and in Egypt, the Naga is ever a wise woman, endowed with extraordinary magic powers. And South and Central America, as in India, in Chaldea, Chaldea is Babylon, and also in ancient Egypt. Well, that's really interesting. How did you get this wise woman? Well, didn't it say that angels fell or angels came down in Genesis 6:4? And didn't they have children with women? So if the women encountered the angels, don't you think the heavenly beings would teach the women something first before the men were taught? Wasn't it Eve that was approached, not Adam that was approached? That's the same thing we see in Genesis 6:4. So in the book of Enoch, it was the women that learned magic. The men came later. As a matter of fact, the men, they took the place of the women. We say there's a fight between patriarchy and matriarchy. There totally is, but patriarchy is not the Bible. Patriarchy is son worship. You see, when the men didn't have access to the same knowledge that the women had, what did they do? They cut off their genitals. They cut off their genitals, they started dressing up like women and decided we're going to keep the women out of the cult. We're going to have the wisdom and keep them out and keep it for ourselves. And those were the eunuchs. That's what the eunuchs were all about. It was taking the women, taking the priestess out of the ritual and replacing her with a priest. Now you have two wise men and no women at all. The serpent is also the dragon. So just like Buddhism, we see that in the Bible. The serpent is also the dragon, and we see that in Revelation 12:9. And the great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was hurled to the earth and his angels with him. So this is interesting. When we talk about a serpent's on the ground, but a dragon's in the air. We've got one up high and one down low. But we can see that the serpent is called the devil and Satan. Satan is a title. Satan means the adversary. Don't you think that the dragon would be the adversary of God? When you start to see a fire-breathing dragon, have you figured out it's the sun? The fire-breathing dragon is the sun. The book of Ezekiel said that you'll do what? You'll start to worship the sun. How many people are worshiping the sun today? Lots. And they pretend like it's no big deal. The details don't matter and whatever, because they don't understand how complex this is. Remember, the serpent is the most intelligent. The serpent was associated to the sun and the serpent was associated to the moon. But if we're dealing with a dragon, that would be fire. And this dragon didn't deceive a couple people, didn't deceive the Europeans, didn't deceive just the Chinese. This serpent deceived the whole world, because you know why? People follow their heart, and I'll show you how they do it. So he was hurled down to earth and his angels with him. You cannot deceive the whole world without being highly intelligent. It's impossible. Remember, we took a look at Osiris and Isis, the mother and the father. And the father figure, what did he hold in his hand? A crooked cane. So he's a shepherd. No, he's a false shepherd. And we look at them and we see they're both serpents. So any gods or goddesses that are off of these two, we know for a fact they're what? Serpents. One is solar, one is lunar, and they have a child. And that child is not Jesus. That is Horus or Harpocrates or the falcon-headed god. When we talk about someone being a bird brain, that means they're not very smart, right? A falcon-headed god. The snake in Chinese belief, Denise Chow, and you can find this on JSTOR. This is from The Snake in Chinese Belief. It's a folklore. It says, in Greek mythology, the goddess of what? Of wisdom. Aren't the serpents associated to wisdom? So who do you think this goddess is? The goddess of wisdom and the goddess of victory hold a shield painted with a snake form. Do you know who else is a goddess of victory? Nike, Athena Nike. That was her full name. The Temple of Athena Nike. Isn't Athena on top of the White House? Figure that one out. The hairs of the goddess of vengeance are in the shape of snakes. I'll say that again. The hairs of the goddess of vengeance are in the shape of snakes. This sounds very familiar. I know a goddess that has snake-like hair. The Greek god of healing, who was depicted carrying a wand with a serpent coiled around it. So we have a god and a goddess with serpent symbolism. But haven't we been seeing that the entire time? We saw Osiris and Isis. It's just the continuation of the exact same thing. But we recognize who this is. You don't have to be an expert in mythology to recognize this face. This is Medusa. So what this is this is your matriarchal religions. And then who defeated Medusa? Perseus. So this is patriarchy. Now, unless this is Jesus, we have a problem, because patriarchy has nothing to do with the Bible then. For all these years, feminists have been complaining, saying the patriarchs, they have been oppressing the woman in the matriarchal religions. No, the people who worship the sun have been oppressing the matriarchal religions. Perseus is a sun god. Medusa is a lunar goddess. But you can see it in Egypt, because of course it's the same religion. The serpent in Egypt was called Apep. And if you notice, we actually kept some Genesis themes here. There's a tree. There's a tree behind the serpent, and sometimes you'll actually see the serpent in the tree in Egypt. Try that one out. And the cat's name is Bast. And it looks like Bast is cutting the head off of the serpent. Starting to see why the pharaohs were buried with cats? So in other words, the solar symbol was Bast, the lunar symbol was Apep, and the sun is defeating the moon. When you think about it, what's brighter? Is the sun brighter or is the moon brighter? The sun is brighter. So the men were associated to the sun and the women were associated to the moon, or this beast, a monster. That's interesting. Again, here's another hieroglyphic. Bast and Apep, same thing. The serpent getting its head cut off. So in other words, the sun extinguishing the moon. How about this one? We studied Mithra. Mithra had a lion's head, like the devil, but at the same time, he also represented the sun. So here we see the sun cutting the head of a bull. What do you think that's about? Look in the upper right-hand corner. In the upper right-hand corner, you can see the moon. In the upper left-hand corner, you can see the sun. How about this one? Let's look at Samaria. We've got Tiamat, the mother goddess. Doesn't look like a mother. She looks like a dragon, some kind of weird dragon angel thing. Okay. And then over here, we've got Marduk. Marduk, for those of you who don't know, is the planet Jupiter. But wait, didn't Christ say in Revelation that Jupiter was Satan? So are you saying that on the right is Satan, on the left is the devil, and we're picking between the two? Yup, you're picking sun or moon. You're celebrating other holidays of the sun or holidays of the moon, or maybe you're really confused and doing both. How about Baal versus Yom? Baal is in the Bible. So if Baal is the sun, then Yom must be the moon. Yom was some kind of a water sea creature. So then Baal must be Marduk. Remember, Baal just means Lord, and Marduk was called Lord Marduk. You can follow this religion all over the world if you know these symbols. So the sun is once again extinguishing the moon. It says Yom is the sea god in the Canaanite pantheon. Which pantheon? The Canaanites. Oh, you mean the son of Ham? Yep. He takes the role of the adversary of Baal in the Ugaritic Baal cycle. So in other words, Baal fights the sea monster, and the sea monster is Yom, and Yom was a Canaanite deity. Very interesting. Who is the Greek equivalent? Poseidon. Oh, okay, because we can follow this everywhere. So what are we actually looking at? The same thing as usual. We're looking at two serpents and their child. We're not seeing the child right now, we're just seeing the two serpents. We have the moon and we have the sun. We have the masculine, we have the feminine. We have patriarchy and matriarchy. And no, patriarchy has nothing to do with the Bible, unless, of course, your Jesus is the sun. So what we're looking at is solar versus lunar. So why is solar cutting the head off of lunar? Because it's vegetation. What does the sun do in the middle of the summer? It gets scorching hot. What do you think happens to vegetation? It gets cooked. What happened in the book of Ezekiel? Didn't women weep for Tammuz? What was Tammuz? Google him, he's a vegetation god. So then we have a mother and a child. So we have a vegetation god and her offspring. So what's the vegetation child? Well, that would be the tare, right? In the Bible, you have the wheat and the tares. You have the serpent seed and the seed of the woman. Well, the seed of the woman are not the lunar. It has nothing to do with the goddess in the Bible. There's no goddess in the Bible. There was Adam and Eve, and they have no connection to the solar god or the solar goddess. But pagans will make you think they do. So what is Satan the serpent copying? What is this all about? Why is Satan going out of his way to keep showing you the sun attacking the moon, the sun attacking the moon, and the sun always overpowers? What is the symbol really about? It must be in the Bible. Of course it is. Isaiah 27:1. In the day of the Lord, in that day, the Lord will take his sharp, great, and mighty sword and bring judgment on Leviathan, the fleeing serpent, Leviathan, the coiling serpent, and he will slay the dragon of the sea. Now do you see where all the mythologies got it from? What you're seeing here is a constant counterfeit. Satan is a copycat. Satan tries to take the place of the Lord. And he comes in like the hero, he comes in like the sun, and then he slays the goddess. Because the goddess is what? A liar. The goddess is a liar. She's deceptive. Remember, Babylon is confusion. So if Babylon is a woman, not a man, what is that telling you? It means the religions associated to Babylon are confusing. They don't make any logical sense. And that's why Adam should have been able to see through it. Adam should have known. He should have known that his wife was being deceived. So here we see Christ, the Lord, and then we see Leviathan. That's the actual imagery that we're seeing across the world. It's Satan just counterfeiting. Here's another example. This is supposed to be Christ, I believe, and he's standing on top of this dragon. So same symbolism. But something really interesting I noticed about not the Leviathan, but this version of Christ. Notice that he has one index finger up. That ain't Christ. We've seen this before. This is the mysteries. Whoever drew this was in the mysteries. This would actually be the sun again. Who is it? Got to be Zoroaster. It's got to be Mithra. It's got to be Baal. It's got to be Marduk. Pick a name. It's one of them. It's the index finger up. That's the finger of Jupiter. Jupiter was Marduk. Marduk has his index finger up because if you study palm language or palm reading, in palm reading, the index finger is called the finger of Jupiter. In palm reading, the middle finger is called the finger of Saturn. This is not John the Baptist on the left. This is who? Jupiter. So what is this all about? This symbol of the sun, in a way, also represents that Adam was not deceived. The reason the sun wins is because they're copying Adam not being deceived. They're also copying Christ. Remember, Adam was the original. He was a man that fell into sin. Why? Because he went against his greater judgment, listened to his wife in a situation where he knew it was not a good idea. You'll find in the Bible, it says that Eve was deceived, but her husband was not. Is this a slight against women? Not at all. They both committed wrong. The husband shouldn't have listened. The husband knew that he was doing something wrong. The wife didn't think she was doing something wrong. Adam should have just put his foot down, but he didn't. Let's take a look. 1 Timothy 2:14. And it was not Adam who was deceived by Satan. The woman was deceived, and sin was the result. So Adam knew that he was doing something wrong. His wife did not, but he didn't stop her. You notice, remember, we talked about the fact that biologically we're different. Men are more into their left brain, women are more into their right brain. The left brain is more analytical, looks at details. If the devil is in the details, typically the male is going to see it because he's more detail oriented. If the woman is big picture, she may overlook the smaller details, but see the big picture. That's what the two have to work together. This is a dysfunctional family. Adam and Eve were not working together. Eve tried to overpower. Adam let her, and the result was they both suffered. I'll repeat that. Eve wanted to overpower. How do we know that? Because the serpent came to Eve with the idea of authority. You can be like God. You can be like the men. You can be just as strong. Just eat from this tree. And then she convinces her husband. And then he knew it wasn't a good idea. And then they both suffered. Genesis 3:6. When the woman saw that the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eyes, and that it was desirable for obtaining wisdom. So she knew that she would gain more wisdom, right? You'll be like God because you'll have more wisdom. You'll be smarter. The serpent was smart. So what's the root behind desire? We're going to take a look at that. And we're going to see why it appeals more to a feminine energy than a masculine energy. We both desire, but I'll show you how this breaks down in a moment. It goes on and says, she also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it. So have you ever heard the idea that Eve was all by herself and the husband wasn't there to protect her? That's not the case at all. Adam stood there idly the whole time and allowed this all to go down. So he knew and he was there. 2 Corinthians 11:3. I am afraid, however, just as Eve was deceived by the serpent's cunning. Why do we have the word cunning? Because we had the word shrewd in the book of Genesis, chapter 3. Shrewd, intelligent, cunning. I'm afraid, however, just as Eve was deceived by the serpent's cunning, your minds may be led astray from your simple and pure devotion to Christ. So remember, with all the serpent worship, doesn't it look like it's this replacement for Christ? We've got this mother and this child, or if we have the dragon's trying to pretend that he's the son, S-O-N, and not the son, S-U-N, which is what he is. Why did Adam follow along if he wasn't deceived? And I want all of the men to think about this because we do it all the time. Let's look at this again. We've got the right brain and we've also got the left brain. Right brain functions. The right brain functions are casual, free, intuitive, visual, nonverbal, imaginative, emotional, holistic, divergent, subjective, random, simultaneous, adventuresome, spatial, sensory, whole, big picture. So here's big picture. Synthetic, left-hand control. Okay, so the right-hand side of the brain is associated to the left hand. If you find that people used to get the strap if they used to write with their left hand, the reason why is because the church was fearful that people would start to tap into their right brain using their left hand, and what would happen? They might meditate, And the meditation from the east is what would unlock this Kundalini serpent. Then we take a look at the left brain. Now we're looking at the masculine, the yang. Systematic, logical, rational, factual, words, verbal, propositional, rational, linear, convergent, objective, sequential, successive, cautious, digital, abstract, parts, detail. That's an important one, detail. If the devil is in the detail, and we see that the serpent is called the devil, and we say, well, the devil's in the details. So which sides of the two brains are going to be more likely to find the devil? The masculine side of the brain. So if men are more left-brained and women are more right-brained, the men are typically going to sense deception faster than their wives will. It's not to say that women can't sense deception. It's just there's that emotional barrier where if they're thinking with their emotions and not with their mind, what's going to happen? It's easier to deceive. If you know someone that's a sociopath, they don't look for victims that are going to outwit them. They look for someone who wears their heart on their sleeve. So the right brain is more closely tied to the emotions. So Eve, if you're going to try to approach someone and say, hey, look, do you want to stand on top of your husband? Do you want to stand on top of God? Do you want to be like God? The right brain is what you want to appeal to because it's the emotional side. The emotions don't have to make sense. If Adam, this is common sense, if Adam was not using his rational mind, because if Adam knew that it wasn't a good idea, he was not deceived, was Adam being rational or irrational when he made the decision to follow? Because he did follow. So if Adam was not using his rational mind, by default, he automatically defaults to his what? Emotional mind. So Adam wasn't using the left brain, Adam used the right brain when he decided, I'm going to follow suit with my wife. But we don't know why he did it. We don't know why he did it, but we kind of do. Adam loved his wife so much, he followed her when he knew it was wrong. I'll repeat that. Adam loved his wife so much. She was made just for him. She was from his rib. He loved her, that he followed her when he knew it was wrong. Do you understand the importance now of why each individual is supposed to do their own thing? We're not supposed to fight over our positions. We're supposed to work together. Eve is the big picture thinker. Eve can see the big situation. Eve can see from a higher vantage point than her husband can. But her husband is going to look at silly little details and get lost in them. Adam looked at those silly little details and he knew it was a bad idea to follow the serpent. Eve was looking at the big picture and thinking, well, I can be like God. Like we can be like God, right? How great of a thing would this be? But Adam knew that something wasn't right here. But it was love. Love was the reason that man fell into sin. Isn't that really interesting? It's kind of poetically beautiful, but at the same time, it's a poetic disaster because they both suffered. Adam and Eve, it wasn't just Eve because Adam followed. Adam and Eve followed their hearts and they both ended up suffering. Isn't it interesting in the Bible that man has headship? And of course, if the woman makes a mistake, who's responsible? Well, yes, each sin is their own, but the man is also responsible. If your wife goes off and does something, is the man still responsible in the Bible? Yes, he'll be judged. He's judged harder. So men, if you hold this position of authority, keep this in mind. If you're always following in times where you maybe shouldn't, when your brain knows that it's maybe not the best thing to do, you're going to be judged for both of you because you should have known better. You are the detail thinker. The Bible does not teach you to follow your heart. The pagan world teaches you to follow your heart. I'm going to show you why they do it, because this goes all the way back to Genesis 3. Your heart isn't necessarily the best at thinking. Your heart is able to feel. Your heart does have some kind of an intelligence to it, but it's more of an irrational intelligence. It's not a linear kind of intelligence. It's not a logical point to point to point to point to point, and then here we go. That's not the type of intelligence that the heart has. Let's take a look. Genesis 8:21. When the Lord smelled the pleasing aroma, he said in his heart, never again will I curse the ground because of man, even though every inclination of his heart is evil from his youth. So the Lord, the person who made you, the Lord tells you, Christ, he says, look, your hearts are evil. Your hearts are evil. And he's saying this when? Well, we must be taking a look at the flood. So after the flood, we can see that even though I will never curse the ground because of man, I know that your hearts are evil. And never again will I destroy all the living creatures as I have done. He flooded the world. Jeremiah 17:9. The heart is deceitful above all things and beyond cure. Who can understand it? Well, if your heart's deceitful, it's probably not a good idea to follow it. Your heart might blind you into thinking that right is wrong and wrong is right. That is, of course, if you believe that the God that created you would know that. Isaiah 1:5. Why do you want more beatings? I'll repeat that. Why do you want more beatings? Why do you keep rebelling? Your head has a massive wound and your whole heart is afflicted. If you have a headshot, can you think really well? If you have brain damage, can you think really well? So if your head has a massive wound, well, then what's going to be affected? Your heart as well. Because if you're not thinking with your head, what are you going to think with? Your heart. And what is that going to be? Rebellion. It's rebellion. What did the serpent do? Rebelled. So Lucifer is a rebel, is he not? So what did Eve do? Eve saw the opportunity to have authority, the same kind of authority as a man, or the same authority as God in this case, way above her husband. That's rebellion. The people in Isaiah are rebelling because they aren't using their heads, and their hearts are filled with perverse wants. So the heart then is where our crazy ideas come from, our desires. Jeremiah 9:8. Their tongue are deadly arrows. They speak deception. With his mouth, a man speaks peace to his neighbor, but where? In his heart, he sets a trap for him. So in other words, when someone deceives you, they might plot with their brain, but where is the deception really coming from? The deception comes from the heart. The heart is the one that wants to set up the trap. Once you want something, that's not your brain. Wanting something is a desire. Is desire emotional or intellectual? Desire is emotional. Daniel 11:27. And the two kings, with their what? Their minds bent on evil? No, their hearts. They had desires. With their hearts bent on evil, will speak lies at the same table, but to no avail. For still, the end will come at the appointed time. You can lie your face off. It's not going to make a difference. At the end, you will meet your demise. Do not lie. Speak honestly, because lies are spoken from the heart and they come from the serpent's tongue. The Bible speaks about the serpent's tongue. That's where the lie comes from, and it comes from the inside, from the heart. It's because you want something. You want something so bad, you'll tell people up is down and down is up, and you think there'll never be a repercussion for it. Deceit comes from the heart. Deceit is not coming from the rational mind. Deceit is coming from the irrational mind. If you want something, just tell people what you want. Don't just go out and take it and portray something backwards. Being backwards is the exact definition of being irrational. This is why deceit comes from the heart. Deceit comes from the right brain. If you yourself are a deceiver, you know you're stuck in your right brain. Ecclesiastes 9:3. This is an evil in everything that is done under the sun. There is one fate for everyone. Furthermore, the hearts of men are full of evil and madness while they are alive, and afterwards they join the dead. In other words, when you follow your heart, where's it going to lead you to? The grave. The heart ultimately leads you towards the grave. So in Ecclesiastes, what we're reading here is we can see that the symbol of the sun, remember, sun is above, which would place moon where? Well, the darkness would be below. So sun is above, moon is below, evil is done under the sun. There is one fate for everyone. Furthermore, the hearts of men are full of evil and madness while they are alive, and afterwards they join the dead. So here what you're seeing is you follow your heart, you're going to walk yourself off a cliff. You can do it together as husband and wife, or you can do it solo. But regardless, if you follow your heart and you ignore your rational mind, God tells you it will lead you to your death. Mark 7:21 and 22. We're not seeing very good stuff about the heart here. So if society, if the world, if Babylon tells you to follow your heart, look at all these verses that say don't do it. For from within the hearts of men comes evil thoughts, sexual immorality, Sex is something that's driven by the heart. You cannot say that's driven by the mind. Theft. When you steal from someone, why do you want to steal? Well, you want to steal because you want something, you desire something, correct? That is something from the heart. Murder. Why would you murder? Anger, jealousy. Is that emotional or intellectual? Oh, that's definitely emotional. Adultery. You sleep with someone else's wife, for example. Is that an emotional thing or an intellectual thing? You know that's a bad idea, but at the same time, you go ahead and do it anyways. Greed. How about greed? Why do you want stuff? Well, you want to have more than your neighbor. Again, there's that word want. There's that word desire. Wickedness. Deceit. We already saw deceit, but deceit comes from the heart. Debauchery. Envy. Why would you be envious? Is envious a feeling? Is jealousy a feeling? Of course it is. Slander. Why do you slander someone? Could be jealousy. Could be that you're mad at them. That's why you slander them. Well, anger. Isn't that coming from the heart? Of course it is. Arrogance. How about pride? Where does pride come from? Pride comes from the heart. So arrogance, pride, and foolishness, because all of these ideas combined, I like how foolishness is at the end. All of these things that we're doing, we know if we had to sit here and face someone and explain it, we'd be embarrassed. We'd be ashamed. If we had to face, our friends and family about sexual immorality, we feel embarrassed. We feel ashamed. We feel foolish. If we stole and we got caught, you'd feel foolish. If you murdered someone and got caught, you'd feel foolish. Adultery, greed, wickedness, deceit. When you get caught in a lie, isn't that embarrassing? Yeah, you feel like a fool. Envy, slander, arrogance. You can see that the heart has a lot of wickedness behind it. It doesn't mean that you can't do good things. It just means if you lead forward with desire, if you lead forward with your heart and you don't think rationally, what's going to happen? You're going to fall off a cliff. Why does the heart bring on evil thoughts? One word explains it all. Your heart brings on evil thoughts because you desire something. When you desire something and you can't properly communicate what it is that you desire, and you decide that you're going to go after it, what's going to happen? Sin. There's nothing wrong with desire, but if it's not handled properly, desire can manifest things such as pride. It can manifest lust. It will definitely create an ego. And what is it ultimately? It's leading you towards selfishness. When you desire something, that's not unhuman. We all have desires. I desire to use my computer and create things. I desire to have new stuff. I mean, we all do. We desire to have nice clothes without holes in it. But if all you do is operate on your desires and you don't have that rational thinking, what are you? Whether you like it or not, you're a selfish person. Your mind isn't as easily deceived as your heart's. Your mind is meant for thinking. Your mind can see if it looks at the details, does this make sense or does this not make sense? If you operate in your life and things don't make sense in one or multiple areas, these are areas clearly where you're following your heart. It means I don't care if it makes any logical sense, it feels good. And when you think about it, it gets pretty dark because once you take feelings to the extreme, what do you think drug addictions are? That's not based on intellectual thoughts. That's based on feelings. When you want to do a drug that's destroying your body, for example, isn't that based on your feelings? You know it's not a good idea, but at the same time, it feels good. A classic example would be cocaine or heroin or any of the opiates. Of course, these drugs feel good. They'd feel good for anyone. But at the same time, we know it's going to do damage to you. It's going to make your liver eventually crap out, if not give you a heart attack. Romans 16 and 18. For such people are not serving our Lord Christ, but their own what? Their own appetites, their own desires. They're running towards their emotions. By smooth talk and flattery, they deceive the hearts of the naive. So people who are running towards their own appetites, people who are running towards their own desires, how do they do it? They try to smooth talk you. They try to use flattery. They try to deceive you because your heart is naive. So this is interesting. If I look at politics, does politics necessarily make sense? No. Do the people still cheer and wave their flags? They sure do. So what's being deceived here? We saw that this guy screwed up once, twice, 3 times. Hey, 3 strikes, you're out. Well, if 3 strikes, you're out, how do all these politicians manage to survive? By deceiving your hearts, because what they're doing doesn't make any logical sense. Your heart, or I'll put in brackets your emotions. Your heart does not need to make sense. I've proved many reasons why your heart doesn't need to make sense. You can have a feeling just because. You can be jealous just because. You can be lustful just because. It doesn't have to make sense. But here's where the catch is. Do you act on that? When you have an evil thought, do you act on that evil thought? When a voice whispers in your head and tells you that you want this, or you want this, or even better, you deserve this, do you act on it? Because if you do, that's when you start to fall prey to being evil. That's when you start to fall prey to being selfish, especially if you want something and you don't communicate it, and instead you just go out and take it. It can override your better judgment. Of course, your heart can override your better judgment. Look at Adam. Adam wasn't deceived. Adam knew he was making the wrong decision, but he overrode his better judgment because he loved his wife. So your heart versus your mind can be easily deceived. So if you're dealing with a situation where there is a serpent, a dragon, a devil that deceived the whole world, it's time to stop thinking with your hearts and start thinking with your heads. The serpent, the devil, came for what? Eve's heart. He didn't care about her mind. As a matter of fact, if it was the mind, he would have went for either one of them. But since he tried to appeal to her emotions, he said, you will be like God. You will have authority. You'll be wise. She caved. And Adam wasn't deceived, but he also made the same mistake as Eve. They both made the exact same mistake. He followed his heart because he followed his wife, because he loved her. Here's the Baphomet, male and female. You see the two serpents where his phallus is, but you can also see the horns. This reminds me of a combination between Isis, but also Hermes. Hermes had this rod with the two serpents, and Isis, well, she had those horns on her head, and she had fire, right? The sun. Well, Baphomet typically has a torch of fire above his head. Now, here's the interesting part. When we look at Isis, we know that Isis is Aphrodite. Hermes, well, that's the planet Mercury. But watch this. We take the word Hermes and Aphrodite, and we put them together, and we get hermaphroditus, or hermaphrodite. The serpent is a male-female. God in the Bible is a male. He identifies as male. He's a flame, right? He's fire. He can choose to be whatever he wants to be. But for whatever reason, God chose to identify as the male gender. He's fire, though. He's light. But here's the interesting part. The serpent, his adversary, if you're going to oppose someone and that person uses maybe the color red, then what are you going to do? I'll use the color blue. So then if God identifies as a male, the serpent, sure, male, female, but she is going to show her beautiful side as the female. The adversary opposes God with a good side and a bad side, depicting the male as evil. Remember, come on, tell me, have you heard that patriarchy is evil? Well, I'm sorry, patriarchy is not the Bible. Patriarchy would be a religion like Islam, because that's not connected to the Bible. Allah is not connected to the Bible. This is a separate deity. So here we can see the male as being evil and the female as being beautiful. So in other words, all throughout history, what have we seen? The matriarchal symbol, the feminine symbol, has always been depicted as a monster. But who was actually the monster out of the sun and the moon? Looks like it was the sun. So the sun depicted the moon as a monster, but she was actually Belle, which is beautiful. And you'll know if you know Spanish, beautiful, Belle, Italian, bella. These are the personifications of a star. All across the world, the serpent worship, the pyramids, are you putting it together? It's Venus, it's Lucifer, the star that goes both ways. Don't like this side of me? How do you like me now? I'm two-faced. It's the evening star and the morning star. It's the queen of heaven. It's also the whore. It's both. Choose your evil. What side do you want? Are you choosing the solar side or are you choosing the lunar side? But let me tell you something. Sun or moon, two things do not, or what is it? Two wrongs don't make a right. It's two wrongs don't make a Christ. God is light, but God chose to reveal himself with the male gender. He's just light. Don't get offended. People fight over gender. It's ridiculous because God himself, he's neither male or female, but he chooses to reveal himself as male. How do you classify light? This is why the devil shows herself as a female. And that's why the devil wears Prada. She manipulates the emotions. Why? Because it's the easiest way to break through the logic. That's why when you look and you see, well, wait a minute, Isis, you have these horns on your head like the devil. And then we look at these images of Semiramis. You've got these horns on your head like the devil. All these holidays that make you feel good, what do they go back to? The devil. Isn't that funny? It's sick. Then we have Zeus Amun. Who's that? Well, Zeus is a sun god. Zeus was a manifestation of the sun. He was the personification of the sun. Why does he have horns on his head? Well, remember, we have the beauty and the beast. So the sun is the beast? Yeah, but the sun was pretending like the woman was the beast. Very sneaky. They're crisscrossing you here. How about Alexander the Great? Was he a Christian? Well, he did defeat the Persians, but what do we know about the Greeks? Oh my goodness, the Greeks were into all kinds of paganism. Didn't the Greeks have Heliopolis? Helios, wasn't he a sun god? Do you not see a sun with horns? Get it? Ancient origins. The snake goddess of Egypt, known as Wajet, was the protector of the land, kings, and women in childbirth. In Minoa, the snake goddess was addressed as Asasa Rimi and was related to the Hittite Ishara, the Kemer Aspara, and the Canaanite Asherah. We actually looked at this goddess Kemer actually earlier when we looked at Cambodia. That's where that one came from. And we saw the word Hittite. Well, that's the Bible. And Asherah, she's in the Bible too. Asherah was the queen of heaven from Jeremiah. These are all the same thing. It says pre-Christian Ireland, Scotland, and England also worshiped the serpent. Of course they did. The Celts worshiped the serpent. What do you think the whole thing about St. Patrick chasing these serpents out of Ireland? Well, that represented the symbols of the pagans, right? You had a moon that was a serpent and a sun that was a serpent, just like we saw with Isis and Osiris. Let's look at Jeremiah 44:15. Then all the men who knew that their wives are burning incense to other gods. That's funny because Adam knew that his wife was being deceived. He knew. He wasn't deceived at all, but he still followed. But look in Jeremiah, there was no difference. Then all the men who knew that their wives were burning incense to other gods, and all the women standing by a great assembly, along with all the people living in the land of Egypt and Pathros, said to Jeremiah, who's Jeremiah? A prophet of God. Look what the women say to the prophet. As for the words you have spoken to us in the name of the Lord, we will not listen to you. Wow. So the women said, with their husbands saying behind them, we're not going to listen to God. Instead, we will do everything we vowed to do. We will burn incense to the Queen of Heaven and offer drink offerings to her, just as we, our fathers, our kings, and our officials did in the cities of Judah and the streets of Jerusalem. At that time, we had plenty of food, good things, and we saw no disaster. Okay, so who's the Queen of Heaven? Isn't that Isis? Isn't that this goddess that's all over the world? Don't we see that the goddess symbol is being trampled on by the God symbol? Isn't the moon being trampled on by the sun? Starting to see how this fits here? So the women were following what? The moon, and their husbands were laying them. That is the worst situation you could be in, because the moon will take you all the way back to the symbol of the serpent in the Garden of Eden. That was the serpent that did the deception. That was the serpent where the husband stood by and said nothing. Why? Because he wanted his wife to be on his side and love him. He didn't want to cause conflict. But from the time we stopped burning incense to the Queen of Heaven and pouring out drink offerings to her, we have lacked everything and have been perishing by sword and famine. So the women said, the only reason we're having a bad time here is because we've stopped burning incense to the Queen of Heaven. Moreover, said the women. Again, remember, look, it tells you clearly, it's the women speaking as a group to the prophet. The men are present, but the men aren't saying anything. Moreover, said the women, when we burned incense to the Queen of Heaven and poured out drink offerings to her, was it without our husband's knowledge? We get it twice. We get it in verse 15 and verse 19. There's that confirmation that the men knew what was going on, but they stood along idly. They knew better. Was it without our husband's knowledge that we made sacrificial cakes in her image and poured out drink offerings to her? Remember, what's the downside to this? What happened in Jeremiah? All those people were destroyed, men and women. But the men didn't say anything. That's okay. They didn't do anything either. Men and women were destroyed. So in the Garden of Eden or in the book of Jeremiah, what would have been the better thing to do? If you know that something is wrong, speak out. If you can see the devil in the details using the rational mind, the left brain, speak out. Don't just do something because it feels good and not having a logical reason. If you see that there's an error, especially an error like this, where it's going to lead to suffering, pain, sin, stop. If Adam was not using his rational mind, he was using his emotions. It's just opposites, right? If the door isn't open, the door is closed. If it's not dark outside, then it must be light outside. It's one or the other. Adam was not deceived. This is why you see the symbol all over the ancient world. The sun could see through the deception of the moon. And where does this go back to? Well, of course, the angels came to women and they provided them with what? Wisdom. What was that wisdom? Serpent's wisdom. Who's the serpent? The enemy of God. So why do you think Medusa had hair like serpents on her head? She represents the earth and the moon. And who does this represent? Perseus. You could say the air and the sun. If you've got earth, wind, fire, water, well, for the male, you've got air and you've got fire. Both of those symbols show up in the Bible. When you have the male figure in patriarchy become evil, you've got the prince of the power of air in the Bible. He's the one that's in all the disobedient and the wicked. On the other side of the fence, you've got the queen, or you've got what? The whore. So on one side, you've got either a king or a dictator. That's the sun. On the side of the moon, you either have a queen or a whore. Who's the whore? The liar. Who's the tyrant? The dictator, right? You have the king with the horns, the tyrant. So you can see when you mix sun and moon together on both sides, whether it's male or female, you get something bad. So in paganism, you had sun, which was a good symbol, represented the light. It represented a king. On the other side, you had the moon, which represented the mother, which represented a goddess, which represented a queen. So you've got king and queen, but when king and queen started to mix, so in other words, when the man started to behave with feminine energies and male energies, what did he turn into? A dictator. When the female started to behave with male and female energies, what did she turn into? Also a dictator. They were both struggling for power. We'll finish with the idea of the origins of Sunday. Sunday church. Where does Sunday church come from? You will know 100% where Sunday church came from with this study. There's no debating. There's no pretending this came from God. This is abominable. We looked at the serpent column. The serpent column was in Delphi. We saw that it had to do with Constantine. The serpent column was also known as the serpentine column, the Plataean tripod, or the Delphi tripod. Check this out. This came from where? Delphi. Wasn't Delphi the place where the priestesses were getting high? They were sniffing some kind of a natural gas, and then they were the oracle. They were prophesying. Is an ancient bronze column at the Hippodrome of Constantinople, also known as the Horse Square. Did you know there's a goddess of horses? In which is now called Istanbul, Turkey. Isn't Turkey the land of the Galatians, the land of the Celts? It is part of an ancient Greek sacrificial tripod, originally in Delphi and relocated to Constantinople by Constantine the Great in 324. So Constantine, okay, let's see what we can put together here. Constantine moved the serpent column. So it was in Delphi, but then he decides to put it in the capital, Constantinople. Now let's look at Sunday. This is the Encyclopedia Britannica, Sunday, the first day of the week. It says the Roman Emperor Constantine died in 337. Remember that date. So Constantine died in 337. A convert to Christianity. He introduced the first civil legislation concerning Sunday in 321. So Sunday church did not exist. Remember, we have a church that started when? After Christ. Didn't we have the book of Acts? The Acts of the Apostles, they're running around through Asia Minor. They're running around through Greece. They're running around through Rome. We've got all these books in the New Testament. What were they doing? They were trying to spread the gospel. So what was the day of worship for them? Because if in 321 it was Sunday, what was the day of worship before 321? It was Saturday. It was today. It was the seventh day. It was the Sabbath. Sunday's the first day of the week. Constantine introduced the first civil legislation concerning Sunday in 321. When he decreed that all work should cease on that day. Wow, that sounds like the Sabbath. The Sabbath actually has to do with a day of rest. And so Constantine said, you have to rest on this day, except that farmers could work if necessary. Wow, that's inconsistent. In the Bible, could farmers work on the Sabbath? No. So Constantine introduced a new Sabbath. The Sabbath was on Sunday, but hey, if you got to work in the field, no big deal. Question, when Christ was approached by the Pharisees and they had eaten corn in the field when they were hungry on the Sabbath, was that not something where the Pharisees poked at them and said, hey, you can't work in the field today? So obviously this is a huge point of contention, but Constantine said, yeah, no problem. That law aimed at providing time for worship. So there's no question. This civil legislation for Sunday was a day of worship. All work should be ceased, except for the farmers. Was followed later in the same century and in subsequent centuries by further restrictions on Sunday activities. See also Sabbatarianism. So here you can see it's literally connected to the word Sabbath. So the Sabbath was replaced by Sunday. When was Constantine baptized? That's $1 million question. He died in 337 AD. When was he baptized? Because normally when a Christian becomes a believer in Christ, that's when they get baptized. So in other words, if we did one Sabbath study and all of a sudden your heart's convicted, you're like, wow, you know what? I can see the truth now. Okay, so do you believe that Christ is Lord? Do you believe that he resurrected from the grave? Let's get baptized. That's all it takes. So when was Constantine baptized? All he had to do was believe some very simple tenets. Constantine the Great and Christianity. Whether Constantine sincerely converted to Christianity or remained loyal to paganism. Oh, so Constantine was a pagan. Well, obviously, because if you weren't a Christian, what else was there? Either Serpent A or Serpent B. So whether Constantine sincerely converted to Christianity or remained loyal to paganism is a matter of debate among historians. His formal conversion in 312 is almost universally acknowledged among historians. However, there's no citation for this, so this sounds like conjecture. Despite that it was claimed that he was baptized only on his deathbed by Arian, the bishop of Eusebius, and Nicodemia in 337. So when did Constantine die? 337. When was he baptized? 337. Wow, this sounds like a real devout Christian. He decides, I'm about to die. I better get baptized so I can go to heaven. Doesn't sound like he's very strong in the faith. The real reasons behind it remain unknown and are also debated. So Constantine was a pagan, and then he didn't get baptized until literally the year that he died. And this is the guy that you think has the authority to change the Sabbath into Sunday? Shame on you. Truths about Constantine. Historians debate whether Constantine sincerely converted to Christianity or remained loyal to paganism. Constantine declared Sunday as the day of worship throughout Rome, changing the Jewish Sabbath of Saturday in 321. Constantine moved the Serpent column from Delphi to Constantinople, named after himself, in 324. Whoa, stop for a second. So let me get this straight. He changed the Sabbath from Saturday to Sunday. That was in 321. He was never baptized until much later. He was a pagan before, and he moved the Serpent column from Delphi after he made Sunday. Ooh, this is getting sketchy. Constantine made Constantinople the capital of Rome in 330. Constantine was not baptized until his deathbed by Arian bishop of Eusebius of Nicodemia in 337. So Constantine, who is still questioned as being a pagan today, changed the Sabbath to Sunday and put a serpent column up only 3 years later and wasn't baptized until his deathbed. Ladies and gentlemen, these are the origins of Sunday church. Remember, we had a solar serpent and a lunar serpent. So was he influenced by some kind of a sun cult? Is that why he chose the Sunday? Let's look at the cult of Mithraism. Mithraism, the worship of Mithra, the Iranian god of the sun, justice, contract, and war in pre-Zoroastrian Iran. Wasn't Constantine going through some different battles? So this is a war god. Known as Mithras in the Roman Empire during the 2nd and 3rd centuries, this deity was honored as the patron of loyalty to the emperor. Well, Constantine was an emperor, And this was what was worshipped prior to Constantine cleaning up everything with Christianity. So after the acceptance of Christianity by Emperor Constantine in the early 4th century, Mithraism rapidly declined. This is looking bad. Remember, what did Mithra even look like? Mithra had a lion's head. Didn't the devil have a roam around like a lion in the Bible? So let me get this straight. The guy who changed the Sabbath to Sunday, who moved a serpent column after he did it, was involved in a cult that had a serpent wrapped around a body of a man with angel wings and a lion's head. And the Christian Bible says, well, that's the devil. And you think that Sunday has any kind of standing in the church? This is the only history you have to explain it. Constantine started it. Clearly, he was worshiping a sun god. Clearly, this was associated to the devil because we saw both Zeus Amun and Alexander the Great, Heliopolis. What do they have? Horns like a devil. Ooh, Sunday doesn't have very good roots at all. Remember, locations of the Temple of Mithra didn't just cover Rome. It went into Europe. It went all the way to London, Spain, Africa, went down into Asia, went down into, it was all over the place. The Battle of Milvian Bridge. History today. The story or a story of what happened was told by Eusebius of Caesarea. So Eusebius was the only person, just so you know, who wrote a book at the same time Constantine was alive. So if you're going to take any kind of influence on the life of Constantine, please read the works of Eusebius. Otherwise, you're not reading a contemporary. You're not reading from someone who lived at the same time as this individual. So told by Eusebius of Caesarea, a Christian biblical scholar and historian who wrote the first biography of Constantine soon after the emperor's death. He knew Constantine well. So it wasn't just like a guy writing about Constantine who saw him somewhere. He actually knew Constantine well and said he had the story from the emperor himself. So Constantine told Eusebius this. Constantine was a pagan monotheist, a devotee of the sun god Sol Invictus. Hey, that's not Mithra. Oh, we'll see. The unconquered sun. However, before the Milvian Bridge battle, he and his army saw a cross of light in the sky above the what? Above the sun. With the words in Greek that are generally translated in Latin as in hoc signo vinces. In this sign, conquer. That's funny. The Jesuits have the exact same motto. They must have got it from who? Constantine. But Constantine got this as a devotee of the sun god Sol Invictus. And he had this vision while looking towards the sun. And the Jesuits have the symbol of a black sun. The Roman cult of Mithra. This is Tertullian.org. Sol, Helios, Sol Invictus. Mithras is always described as Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun in inscriptions. Bingo, we found it. So Constantine, what was his religion? Well, it was sun worship. Through who? Sol Invictus. Who's Sol Invictus? Mithra. Who's Mithra? Well, he's got a lion head and he has a serpent around his body. Who do you think it is? It's Satan. So Constantine's former religion was the worship of the sun, the worship of Satan. Exactly what you saw in the book of Ezekiel. They're worshiping Baal. So then Sunday is associated to the worship of Baal. Do you follow your heart or do you use your head? This is the question you're going to ask yourself. If you follow your heart, eventually you're going to find that nothing makes sense. And when you're confused, what kind of things can happen? Well, if you're driving, you might go in the wrong direction. If you're fighting a war, you might slay a friendly. And if you're walking through the game of life, you might find yourself walking off of a cliff and feeling awesome while you do so. So my question is, are you sure about the Sunday? Is your heart guiding you to the serpent? Remember, there's two serpents here. We got a solar one and a lunar one. If you've evaded the goddess, have you evaded the God as well? Remember, it says you've got Satan and you've got the devil. You've got the serpent and you've got the dragon. Romans 16:18. For such people are not serving the Lord Christ, but their own appetites. Was Constantine serving his own appetite? I'd say so. By smooth talk and flattery, they deceived the hearts of the naive. Remember what Jeremiah said. Jeremiah 17:9. This is the same book where you got the Queen of Heaven, where the people are like, we're not going to listen. It'll be fine. The heart is deceitful above all things and beyond cure. Who can understand it? Our modern day dragons? Let me show you who the dragons are in the modern day. Let me show you who's manipulating you with dragon symbolism the same way that they did back in the past. Remember, we have Osiris and Isis. We have got fire dragon and we've got water dragon. Mom and dad. Look at this. We've got NASA. So either God's correct and Genesis is true, or NASA's correct. But they both can't be correct because there's two separate realities being depicted here. If you read even so much as page 1 of the book of Genesis, and then you see NASA and all their video footage, you got to pick one or the other. So either you're with the world and we're going to go to Mars someday and we've been to the moon and that was never faked, or maybe they've been faking it all along. What's this shuttle called, or satellite? The Osiris Rex. Wow, that sounds like an Egyptian sun god. Sounds like a serpent. And then didn't they have the Apollo missions? Why is that important? Well, Apollo was a sun god. Last time I checked, the devil, as a male, or Satan, had horns on his head, and he was associated with the sun. Satan is a sun god with horns on his head, and here we have people challenging the Bible, and what do they depict? The sun. They depict Apollo. You can clearly tell it's Apollo on these space missions because they have the sun being pulled by a bunch of horses. Are you sure you know what the chevron means when you look at the NASA symbol? Do you know that Apollo is Helios? And Helios is who? Osiris. So if Osiris is a serpent, then Apollo is a serpent. So NASA, you're a bunch of liars. Some will not believe what I'm saying. But hey, we've got another space program. I mean, we've only got 2 major space programs. We've got SpaceX and we've got NASA. So if one is the serpent, then the other one is the dragon. Ouch. SpaceX. Why do they call it SpaceX? Wasn't Christ crucified on something that looked like a cross, maybe an X or a T? If you take a look, you'll find that the cross, if you look in places like the UK, you'll find a different type of a cross. You'll find a cross that looks like an X. You see, the Phoenician Tau was an X. It wasn't a T. The Romans were the ones that changed it to a T. Originally, the crucifix was an X. So is that why we have the X-Men and SpaceX and Generation X? Are we living in the generation where we're so deceived that Generation X thinks they know everything and they basically tossed away the old ways of the Bible? I mean, the grandparents and parents, a lot of them used to go to church. They used to know these things. But then Generation X came along, and so did NASA and all their discoveries. And because of all this media and all this programming, we laugh at page 1 of Genesis. And I just find it so interesting that both space programs, one is a serpent, the other one is a dragon. But hey, you know, I'm the fool, right? But again, you can see it in Washington. In Washington, in the Washington Monument, which is an Egyptian obelisk, go figure. What's on the inside? Well, above George Washington's head, we've got this double serpent. Oh, would that be like a lunar serpent and a solar serpent? Sure would be. Remember what the book of Isaiah said. How have you fallen from heaven, O morning star, son of the dawn? You have been cut down to the ground, destroyer of nations. You said in your where? In your mind? No. The serpent said in your heart. I will ascend to the heavens. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will sit on the mount of assembly in the far reaches of the north. I will ascend above the tops of the clouds. I will make myself what? I will make myself like the Most High. Didn't the serpent, the same one, say to Eve, you will be like God? Can you now connect Genesis 3 and Isaiah 14? The same serpent that said to Eve, you will be like God, you will have this authority, you will stand taller, is the same one in Isaiah that says 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 I statements, 5 selfish statements. I will be the best. I will make myself like God. The pentagram, Venus, that's your 5. These are the personifications of a star, Venus. You're just picking between the lesser of 2 evils. From your own subjective perspective. Logically, it makes no sense. But to your heart, you're either picking to be the dictator or you're picking to be the queen. When you look at this picture I showed you, this was from Italy. This is Isis. On the right-hand side, this is Isis. This is the Egyptian goddess Isis. She has the serpent in her hand. She would be the beauty. On the left-hand side, we see this horned god. Well, that's the beast. Let's look at the Baphomet. Put the two together, what do you get? This androgynous god. You can see the phallic symbol is showing up with the beauty. And then with the beast, you can see they're the horns. You've got the serpent and you've got the dragon. Don't let the serpent dragon deceive your heart and take your inheritance of heaven. Remember, what's heaven based on? You can't have any other gods before God. That's the first commandment. If you choose this one, either the right side or the left side, you're choosing Venus. You're choosing two sides of the same thing. Lucifer is a love god. Check this out. Androgyny. So the female is represented as the square. The male is represented as the circle. Some occultists look at it the other way around. It really doesn't matter. If you would prefer to call the male the square and the female the circle, makes no difference to me. Here's my point. When you take two circles and then you take a square and put it at an angle, what do you make? You make a heart. So are you starting to see a truth about the Trinity having to do with Lucifer? This is the Trinity right here. A square and two circles. That's the Trinity. What did the serpent, what did the serpent go? That's horrible subtext here. Why did the serpent go after Eve? Why did the serpent go after Eve? The answer is Lucifer is a love god. Can't you see it? You've got this androgynous deity, both male and female. One's a circle, one's a square. This does not resemble a heart. If I cut your chest open, your heart doesn't look like this. Why do all little kids think that stars in the sky are five-pointed when they're not? And why do all little kids draw hearts that look like this when hearts don't look like this? It's because it has to do with Lucifer. Deuteronomy 10:12-17. And now Israel, what does the Lord God require? I'm going to read that again. What does he require of you? But to fear the Lord your God and to walk in all his ways. Why does it say to fear God? Because if you don't fear God, what are you going to do? You're going to disobey. You're not going to listen. Fear the Lord God. Walk in all his ways. Some of them? No, all of his ways. To love him. To serve the Lord God with all your heart and all your soul. So you can only serve God with all your heart and all your soul if you do what? Walk in all of his ways. And to keep the commandments and statutes. A lot of people will see the commandments, but they miss this part where it says the statutes. What were the statutes? Well, there were all these extra things that came after Moses got the commandments. And they all make sense. When people say, well, there's too many commandments already, I'm like, 10 is not too many. And when you think about it, when you're at work, don't you have policies at work? How come you can follow 1,000 policies at work? How come your government can make up 1,000 different rules and you have no problem digesting that? And then the Bible says, follow these never changing laws and statutes. You're like, oh, that's too many. That's too restrictive. I'm like, come on, your government comes up with a new rule every day. Get over it. And to keep the commandments and statutes of the Lord, which I am commanding you today for your good. Behold, to the Lord your God belong heaven and the heaven of heavens, the earth and all that is in it. So does Satan own the world? No, God owns it all. Yet the Lord set his heart in love on your fathers and chose their offspring after them, you above all peoples, as you are this day. Listen to this most important part. Circumcise therefore the foreskin of your heart and no longer be stubborn. You know when you're being stubborn. You know when you hear the truth. You know when you have enough pieces of the puzzle to see what is a lie versus what is true. It's not your brain that is not capable of handling this. It is your heart that's not capable of handling this. The only way you can ever come to God, if you're stubborn, is you have to first circumcise your heart. Like the Pharaoh, cut away the hardness on your heart. Stop pretending like you know when you clearly don't. You can see the devil in the details. You can see the writing on the wall. Don't be ignorant. It's funny, the people in Jeremiah, they were stubborn too. And what happened? It all led to their death. Look at this picture on the left-hand side. This looks like the heart we have today. And if you look at this heart, what do you notice? What's in the center of the heart? The devil. So my question is your heart to God or is your heart to something else? It doesn't matter what your heart is towards. You can tell me anything. It doesn't matter. If your heart is towards anything else than what God wanted, you have this serpent, you have this beast nature inside of yourself. It's undeniable. It says on the bottom of this picture, it says, representation of the inner state of man, who is servant of sin and suffers the devil to reign within him. If you know you're sinning, if you know you're backwards and you just don't care, don't pretend like your heart doesn't look like this. It can be very dark or it can be a little bit dark. But the idea is to be holy, you have to separate yourself from all this darkness.
For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of the dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Brothers and sisters, the sword is coming. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. That at the name of Jesus, every knee shall bow.